Picture a man standing at the edge of a fairground in Cleveland, Ohio. The year is 1859. He is 19 years old. Across the street, men are celebrating. News has just arrived from western Pennsylvania that oil has been struck at Titusville. Fortunes, they are saying, will be made overnight. Around him, people are already planning how to get there, how to buy in, how to find the oil. They see a resource. They see riches waiting to be pulled from the ground. John D. Rockefeller looks at the same scene and sees something entirely different. He sees disorder. He sees a market with no architecture, no logic, no structure, a mob of speculation with no one controlling the thing that matters most. Not the oil, not even the drilling. The movement of the oil from the ground to the consumer. The infrastructure layer. The layer no one is thinking about. He doesn't go to Titusville. He goes back to work. He waits. He watches. He maps. That is not the story most people know about Rockefeller. Most people know the villain, the robber baron, the anaconda, the man who swallowed an industry whole and spat out the competitors. Some know the philanthropist, the man who gave away hundreds of millions, who built the University of Chicago, who funded medical research that saved millions of lives. What almost no one understands is the mechanism underneath both portraits. The specific psychological operating system that Rockefeller was running, quietly and without interruption, for the better part of 80 years. The system that looked from the outside like power, but from the inside was something stranger and more instructive than power. It was architecture. This is not a history lesson. This is a diagnosis. He was born in 1839 in Richford, New York, the second of 6 children. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was a traveling salesman, a sometime con artist, and a man of spectacular unreliability, frequently absent, occasionally reappearing with cash and stories, and by some accounts deliberately practiced negotiation on his own children. Not as warmth, as a drill. He wanted them sharp. He wanted them to see deals everywhere. He got exactly what he trained for in exactly one of his children. His mother, Eliza, was the structural force of the household, devout, precise, unyielding. A woman who managed 6 children on intermittent income by treating every penny not as money, but as a decision. She did not lament poverty. She engineered around it. John watched this. He internalized it not as a lesson, but as a survival protocol. At 12, he kept a ledger, not because anyone told him to, because imprecision in his household had consequences he could already measure. Every cent earned, every cent spent, every tithe, 10% to his Baptist church, even when there was almost nothing to tithe. The ledger was not virtue. It was the only rational response available to a highly analytical child in conditions of material scarcity. The habit was installed not by teaching, but by necessity. It would never leave him. At 16, he took his first job, assistant bookkeeper at a produce shipping firm in Cleveland, earning 50 cents a day. What he did with that job is the seed of everything that came after. He did not simply balance the books. He studied the books. He mapped the system, where the money moved, where the inefficiencies lived, where the leverage was. He was performing a role, but he was thinking about a structure. That distinction in between performing the role and mapping the system is the first and most important thing you need to understand about how Standard Oil was built. He entered the oil business in 1863, 4 years after Drake's discovery at Titusville. By this point, the western Pennsylvania oil fields were a spectacle of chaos, men making fortunes in a week and losing them in a month, prices swinging from 10 cents a barrel to $10, the infrastructure of an entire industry being improvised in real time. The speculators were fighting over the oil, the wildcatters were drilling, the financiers were scrambling. Rockefeller looked at all of this and made a determination that his era had no language for. The money is not in the oil. The money is in the system the oil moves through. He invested in refining, not drilling. He entered the industry not at the resource level, but at the processing level. And from the first day, he applied the same protocol he had run on that bookkeeper's ledger in Cleveland. Find the inefficiency no one else is accounting for and eliminate it. His refinery produced its own barrels. It recycled its own byproducts. It tracked every cost to the fraction. His competitors thought they were competing against a refinery. They were competing against an accounting system that never stopped finding pennies they were dropping. By 1870, he incorporated Standard Oil of Ohio. It was one of the largest refineries in Cleveland. Within 2 years, it would be the largest in the world. Within 12 years, it would control 90% of American oil refining capacity. The speed seems impossible until you understand the mechanism. And the mechanism begins with the railroads. Here is where the psychological portrait turns structural in a way that changed American capitalism permanently. In 1868, Rockefeller approached the major railroads, the New York Central, the Erie, the Pennsylvania, with a proposition. Guarantee Standard Oil a secret, fixed rebate on every barrel shipped, and Standard Oil would guarantee the railroads predictable, high-volume business. For the railroads, this was rational. Predictable volume is more valuable than variable premium. They agreed. What Rockefeller had just constructed was invisible to every competitor he had. Every independent refiner in Ohio was paying full freight rates. Standard Oil was paying a fraction. The gap was not efficiency. Standard Oil's refineries were more efficient, yes, but not by enough to explain the price differential that was about to devastate the industry. The gap was architectural. Rockefeller had inserted a structural advantage into a layer of the business that his competitors could not see, could not access, and did not even know existed. Think of it this way. Imagine you and a competitor are both running restaurants on the same block. You both buy from the same supplier, pay the same rent, hire from the same labor pool, but you have a secret arrangement. Every time your competitor orders supplies, part of the cost is quietly redirected to subsidize your order. Your food is cheaper, not because you cook better, but because the supply chain is secretly tilted. Your competitor is not losing a fair fight. They are losing a rigged one, and they don't know the rules have changed. That is what the railroad rebate system was. And it was only the first layer, because Rockefeller did not stop at the rebate. He looked at the railroad dependency and saw vulnerability. If he depended on the railroads, he was renting from someone else. And he did not accept dependency on a layer he did not control. He began building pipelines. He acquired barrel factories. He bought warehouses, distribution networks, tanker cars. One by one, he eliminated every layer of the supply chain that he did not own. By the early 1880s, Standard Oil did not simply refine oil. It controlled what happened to oil before and after refining. The competitor who wanted to sell oil was, in many cases, renting infrastructure from the company they were trying to compete against. This is not strategy. This is psychology. The deep, structural refusal to accept any variable in the system that you do not own. If you're finding this portrait of economic architecture genuinely useful, the kind of analysis that goes deeper than the standard biography into the actual mechanisms of how economic dominance is built, consider subscribing to Billionaire Logic. We build videos exactly like this one. Not summaries, not timelines, but psychological and structural autopsies of the most consequential figures in business history. What we're about to examine, how Standard Oil's behavioral architecture actually operated internally, why Rockefeller's competitors kept underestimating him even as he was destroying them, and the one psychological paradox at the center of his philanthropy that most historians miss. That analysis is still ahead. Stay with us. By 1882, Standard Oil controlled approximately 90% of American oil refining capacity. Rockefeller organized this through a trust structure. Shareholders of acquired companies surrendered their stock in exchange for trust certificates, their operations absorbed into the unified machine. This was not a legal innovation for its own sake. It was the organizational expression of the system's architecture at its full scale. Eliminate every variable you do not control until the only variable left in the system is you. The internal culture of Standard Oil was an extension of the ledger book Rockefeller had kept at 12. Cost accounting, obsessive, detailed, continuous, was not a management practice. It was the competitive intelligence apparatus. Every dollar of waste found was a dollar available for acquisition, for price compression, for outlasting a competitor. The efficiency was not frugality for its own sake. It was weaponized precision. And when competitors refused to sell, when they held on, believing their independence had value, believing that the market would eventually correct and give them room, Rockefeller deployed the most misunderstood tool in his arsenal. He lowered prices below cost of production in their markets. Not everywhere, not permanently, just in the specific markets where the competitor operated for exactly as long as it took. Standard Oil sustained those prices using profits from the markets it controlled entirely. The competitor, operating without the capital buffer that total market control provides, could not sustain the loss. Weeks passed, months. The competitor's capital eroded. Then the offer came again. The same offer that had been declined before, now at a lower number, because the business was now weaker. Almost everyone accepted. This was not cruelty, it was arithmetic. The business that can sustain a temporary loss longer than its competitor can survive, it does not need a better product. It needs a longer runway. Rockefeller had built the longest runway in American industrial history. He understood, with perfect clarity, that patience is only an asymmetric advantage when your capital base is structurally superior. He made certain his was. Then he waited. His competitors called it unfair. They were right. That was the point. Tell me in the comments, which of Rockefeller's psychological frameworks do you think is most applicable to building wealth in today's economy? By the 1890s, Rockefeller's public image was among the most toxic in America. Ida Tarbell had begun the investigation that would become the history of the Standard Oil Company, the most consequential piece of business journalism in American history. Published serially in McClure's magazine between 1902 and 1904, it documented the secret rebate system, the predatory pricing, the systematic destruction of independent refiners, in sordid, verified detail that Rockefeller's legal team could not refute, and his public relations apparatus could not deflect. Tarbell's father had been an independent oil producer. She had watched as a child as Standard Oil moved through Pennsylvania like weather. Not violent, not dramatic, just structurally inescapable. Her reporting was not emotional, it was architectural. She laid out the mechanism with exactly the precision it deserved. The public response was seismic. Theodore Roosevelt, whose political identity had been built around trust-busting, found his target. What did Rockefeller do? Almost nothing publicly. He said very little. He did not testify voluntarily. He did not engage the press. He attended church. He played golf. He continued giving money away. He waited, because his psychological operating system had a protocol for external pressure that was identical to his protocol for market competition. Do not react. Do not pivot. Do not introduce the variable of panic into the system. Compress. Hold. Let the external pressure resolve. This looked from the outside like arrogance. From the inside, it was the same discipline he had exercised since the ledger at 12. The refusal to make an imprecise move under pressure, because precision is most valuable precisely when the pressure to abandon it is highest. The Supreme Court ordered the dissolution of Standard Oil in 1911. 34 companies, decades of construction, the full architecture, ordered broken apart by federal mandate. The ruling was, by any measure, the most consequential antitrust action in American history. Rockefeller received the news on the golf course. He finished the hole. Within 12 months, the combined market value of the 34 broken companies exceeded the value of the unified trust. Rockefeller held shares in all 34. He was worth more after the dissolution than before it. The government's attempt to end Standard Oil had been the final act of its business logic, the last, involuntary expansion of its value. The hammer had struck the structure and found it more valuable in pieces than in whole. He had already modeled this. 3 moves before the government made its final one. There is one contradiction at the center of Rockefeller's portrait that history tends to smooth over, and this script will not. From his first paycheck at 16, Rockefeller tithed 10% to his Baptist church. He never stopped. Through the years of railroad rebates and predatory pricing, and the systematic elimination of independent businesses whose owners had done nothing wrong except exist in a market he had decided was his, he was tithing. He was teaching Sunday school. He genuinely believed, and said so repeatedly, that God had given him the capacity to make money and that he bore an obligation to deploy that capacity wisely. He meant it. The belief was not a performance. The ledger he kept of his charitable giving was as meticulous as the one he kept of his business expenses, and it predated Standard Oil by decades. What do you do with that? A man who dismantled the livelihoods of thousands of independent businessmen, who operated a system of secret advantages that his competitors had no mechanism to counter or even identify, and who genuinely believed he was an instrument of divine purpose, who gave quietly and consistently before anyone was watching. The narrator will not resolve this for you. It does not resolve. It is the actual moral texture of the case, the simultaneous truth that Rockefeller was the most consequential philanthropist in American history and the man most directly responsible for demonstrating that American capitalism, left without constraint, produces outcomes that the people operating within it cannot counter and the public cannot see until the damage is done. Both are true. Both are part of the portrait. The discomfort you feel sitting between them is not confusion, it is accuracy. As for the 1872 scheme by which Rockefeller and a consortium of refiners attempted the most aggressive consolidation in American industrial history, which collapsed under public outcry and legislative pressure before it could be executed, he denied involvement for decades. The historical evidence confirms it. This was the one move that went too far too fast, that surfaced the architecture before the public was ready to be unable to stop it. Rockefeller learned from it the way he learned from everything. Not by changing the goal, but by refining the mechanism. Slower, more invisible, more patient. Now we reach the close, not a list, an argument, because the 5 things this case study teaches cannot be separated from each other. They are a single operating system, and they only work together. The first thing Rockefeller understood, and that his competitors never did until it was too late, is that you do not compete at the product level if you can compete at the infrastructure level. He did not try to make better kerosene. He controlled the pipelines, the railcars, the barrel factories, the distribution networks. By the time his competitors understood what they were actually fighting, they were paying him for the privilege of fighting him. The infrastructure layer is where monopoly lives. The product layer is where competition lives. The choice of which layer you operate on is a psychological decision before it is a strategic one, and most people never make it consciously at all. The second thing, and this flows directly from the ledger at 12, is that frugality is not a virtue. It is a competitive weapon. The man who accounts for every penny finds the inefficiency that his competitor, comfortable with approximation, never sees. Every dollar of waste eliminated at Standard Oil was a dollar available for acquisition, for sustained below-cost pricing, for outlasting the next competitor. The habit that began as a survival mechanism in a house of material scarcity became the intelligence apparatus of the largest corporation in American history. The scale changed. The habit is the same. The third thing is what makes the predatory pricing possible and what almost no one discusses correctly. Patience is the asymmetric advantage that a superior capital base provides. When you can sustain a temporary loss longer than your competitor can survive it, time is your weapon. You do not need to move fast. You need to not lose for long enough. Rockefeller did not run Standard Oil on urgency. He ran it on duration. He could wait. His competitors, operating without the buffer of total market control, could not. The business that survives longest does not always win because it is best. It wins because it is last. The fourth thing is the shift from participant to architect, from competing within the system to designing the system. Rockefeller's competitors were asking, how do we refine oil more cheaply? Rockefeller was asking, who controls what happens to the oil before and after refining, and how do I become that entity? These are not variations on the same question. They are questions from different positions in the structure. Participants pay to play. Architects collect from everyone who plays. The shift between those positions is not a strategy adjustment. It is a psychological one. The decision to stop accepting the rules of competition as given and to redesign the game. And the fifth thing, the one that tends to get dismissed as either cynical or irrelevant, is that narrative is infrastructure and it requires the same deliberate construction as any other layer of the system. Rockefeller spent the first 40 years of his career building an economic machine. He spent the last 40 rebuilding the story told about it. The University of Chicago, the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, the General Education Board, the Rockefeller Foundation, hundreds of millions of dollars distributed with the same precision he had applied to barrel factories and railroad rebates. The narrative shifted. The man who had been the anaconda became the grandfather handing out dimes to children. Whether this was moral evolution or calculated legacy management, and the honest answer is that it was genuinely both, it worked. Because Rockefeller understood that public perception operates by exactly the same structural logic as a market. You do not leave infrastructure to chance. You build it deliberately, or someone else builds it for you, and you do not get to choose the material they use. Here is what this case produces, viewed in full. A boy who kept a ledger at 12 because imprecision had consequences he could already measure. Who mapped every system he entered before performing any role within it. Who applied that habit, without interruption, without revision, without panic, to an industry in its infancy, and built from it the most complete economic dominance that American capitalism had ever produced. Who gave away more money than almost anyone in history and destroyed more small businesses than almost anyone in history, and who appears to have experienced no contradiction between those two facts because his operating system had no node for contradiction, only for variables in their control. The golf course in 1911, the Supreme Court ruling in his hand, the smile that the newspapers reported and could not explain. It was not arrogance. It was the expression of a man who had already run the model, already calculated the outcome, already understood that the 34 pieces would be worth more than the whole, and who had therefore experienced the antitrust dissolution not as a defeat, but as the final involuntary confirmation that the system he had built was structurally sound even in disassembly. He was 72 years old. He would live to 97. He spent those remaining 25 years on the golf course, in church, and giving money away with the same precision he had used to accumulate it. The question this case leaves open is not whether Rockefeller was good or bad. History has spent more than a century failing to resolve that and will continue to. The question it leaves open, the one that actually matters to anyone watching this who is trying to understand how economic dominance is built, is this: how much of what Rockefeller did was the product of a psychology that can be learned, and how much of it was the product of conditions, material scarcity, an absent father, the specific chaos of an industry in its first decade that cannot be engineered or replicated. The ledger says one thing, the railroad rebate says another, the philanthropy says a third, and the golf course smile, that says something no one has fully translated yet. If this video changed the way you understand how economic architecture actually works, subscribe to Billionaire Logic. We publish exactly this kind of structural portrait regularly, and the next one goes deeper into a case that makes Standard Oil look simple. And if you want to keep the conversation going, drop a comment. Tell me which of the 5 frameworks you think translates most directly into how wealth gets built today. I read every one of them. The ledger never lies. Rockefeller knew that before he was a teenager. The only question left is what you're going to write in yours.